If you are ready to go deep and harness the full power and potential of astrology to shape change in your own life and the world around you, stay with me. My name is Alina, and I am the astrologer for creatives and change makers, and you are listening to Promethea Astrology. Today we're talking about the sun. The sun is in astrology associated with the mind, the intellect, the ego, the father, the light you shine into the world. The plan for today is to get into the basic meaning of the sun in astrology, get into the astronomy, the mythology, the exaltation scheme, the planetary joy scheme, how we look at the sun in a birth chart to interpret things, and also the transits to the sun. So you can check out the timestamps below if you want to skip to any of those particular sections. And I will start by introducing my method and the way that we are going through the planets here. This is a part of a series that I'm doing on each of the planets. And what I'm doing in this series is to introduce each of the planets in their own unique essential nature, diving into what the most abstract core meaning of these planetary symbols are, without going into this is what the sun in Gemini means, this is what the sun in Virgo means, this is what the sun in Scorpio means. I'm not going to be delineating all of those things. Instead, what I'm interested in doing is introducing to you what the most abstract core foundational meaning of each of the planets are, and then I'll go through each of the zodiac signs. So subscribe here if you want to stay with me on this journey. And by understanding the zodiac signs on their own and the planets on their own, my hope is that you will have a more direct relationship with these symbols and the ability to make your own delineations, to be able to know this is what the sun means, this is what Aries means, this is how I can make sense of the sun in Aries. And when you're able to do this, to recognize these different planetary and astrological symbols and how they show up in your own life, it is ultimately much more transformative and powerful for you. It will never be as impactful to have an astrologer tell you, this is what this means for you. It will be much more meaningful for you to understand deeply within yourself how these symbols manifest in your own life. So that's what I hope to do for you here today and on this series. Another benefit to this approach is that you will be able to sidestep the projections of other people and the culture. Sometimes people have their own experiences and feelings about certain signs and symbols within astrology. So by understanding more abstractly what each of these things mean, and without having to go through the middleman of an interpreter, you can directly decide for yourself what your relationship is to these different symbols without the projections of other people or the culture at large. Because of course, at different points throughout human history, we valorize and demonize different energies, different tendencies, different traits. So understanding on the most abstract level which each of these things means, you can then sort of avoid that tendency or escape what might be the cultural preferences of the day. So the sun is masculine. The sun has to do with the light that you shine into the world, the mind, the ego, the father. Sometimes the sun can literally represent the father, so certain aspects or house placements can indicate qualities of the father or things that you inherit from your father. Sometimes I have found that people actually switch this up. Normally the moon is like the mother and the sun is like the father. Moon, things you inherit from the mother. But sometimes these are opposite. Sometimes people actually identify more with the moon as the father and the sun as the mother. So you can maybe look into that and see if either of these two ways make sense for you. But most often it is the sun as the father and the moon as the mother. And it's not that this is like the essential nature of who your father is. Your father has a whole life and personality and selfhood outside of the part of his identity that is being your father. It's more the way that you perceived and received your father's fathering. So how your experience of your father was may be reflected in the zodiac sign that your sun is in. So you might consider that. The sun is the more public part of our life and our personality and the chart. So the moon, on the other hand, is more like the subconscious, how you are in private settings. And the sun sign is more like how you are out in the world, how people know you, how you're seen. The sun loves to be visible, to shine, to radiate into the world in a very consistent way, as opposed to the moon, which has these famous cycles of waxing and waning. The sun does not. The sun has also been associated with God and kingliness at different points in the past, and sort of leadership qualities, crowns of office, those sorts of things. Very much likes to lead, the sun. To take it back mythologically, the sun was associated with the god Helios, or even before that, the Mesopotamian god Shamash. And both Helios and Shamash were depicted as being carried about in a chariot that rose in the east and set in the west. And Helios could see everything going on and was also associated with judgment in a way. And justice, observing everything that was happening and also somewhat being responsible for serving justice and judgment to the goings on that he was observing. He was a protector in that way, also associated with divination and revealing secrets of the future. The sun is, of course, the most popular thing that people know about in astrology. Everyone seems to know their sun sign. Not very many people know much else about their astrology, but most everyone has heard of the sun sign and knows what theirs is. This is because of a popular book called Sun Sign Astrology that was published in the 70s by Linda Goodman. And so many people actually only know about astrology through the sun sign and are not even aware that there are signs for other planets, which there are. And you can go through all of my other videos if you want to learn about those other planets. And while the sun is extremely important, part of the big three that we talk about in astrology, the sun, moon, and rising. These are the most core essential pillars of who you are. I am a traditional astrologer. I practice Hellenistic astrology. So in ancient times, people actually considered the rising sign to be the most important part of the chart. And we can understand this by thinking about how the sun is more of qualities that we inherit from the father, the moon qualities inherited from the mother, and then the rising sign being the point on the eastern horizon where the sky meets the earth, the mind meets the body, both mind, body, and soul together. So this is also the most unique part of the chart. It changes about every 2 hours, as opposed to the sun, which changes about every 4 weeks or so, and the moon, which changes about every 2.5 days. So the rising sign is really what is most uniquely you. Sort of like the core archetype of who you are, notwithstanding the parents. Sort of the unique energy, soul energy that you are bringing into the world, notwithstanding all external factors. But the sun is still very important and will be something people really recognize in you. To get into the astronomy of the sun, you are probably familiar with the idea of solstices and equinoxes. So the sun is actually also responsible for the tropical zodiac, whereas the sidereal zodiac is determined by the constellations. The actual physical constellations and where they are in the sky has moved over the past 3,000 years since the zodiac was originally conceptualized. So where the constellations are now is no longer where they were. So if you are a traditional Indian astrologer practicing Vedic astrology, then you will probably use the sidereal zodiac, which actually uses where the constellations are as their zodiac. For me, as a traditional Western astrologer, I use the tropical zodiac, which is not actually correlated to where the constellations are anymore, but instead where the solstices and equinoxes happen. So the signs in the tropical zodiac are determined by the sun's cycle, where we have the spring equinox initiating Aries season, the summer solstice initiating Cancer season, the fall equinox initiating Libra season, and the winter solstice initiating Capricorn season. And then the signs that follow in the middle of the season, so the beginning of the season, these are the cardinal signs. The middle of the season, these are the fixed signs. And then the end of the season, as we're changing seasons, are the mutable signs. So the sun is actually determining, and the seasons that the sun, of course, dictates are what determines which zodiacal season we're in. This determines the quadruplicity of each sign. Whether or not a sign is cardinal, fixed, or mutable is called the quadruplicity because there are 4 cardinal signs, 4 fixed signs, and 4 mutable signs. These are part of the core signifiers that give us the most archetypal kind of base framework for the characteristics of the zodiac signs. There's the quadruplicity, there's the element, the gender, the symbol, and the planetary ruler. So much of the meaning that is made out of the different zodiac signs actually has to do with the season that they're in. So for instance, Venus, the planet of love, beauty, romance, harmony, sensuality. Watch this video for a deep dive on Venus. Venus's seasons are Taurus and Libra season. So this is the middle of spring and the beginning of fall. These are also some of the most beautiful times of year. Spring is such a lovely time, and the colors turning in the fall is also such a lovely time. So this is part of how the original ideas about the qualities of the different signs were determined. And for instance, Aries season, the beginning of spring, the spring equinox, is this very initiating energy. You think of the seeds bursting from the ground, very much cardinal fire. That's what Aries is. Breaking free, coming forward, initiating, bursting with life, lots of energy. This is Aries. And Capricorn, at the beginning of winter, on the other hand, is the time of year where we have harvested all of our fall crops. There are no more crops for the winter. We need to now ration what is left and make sure that we have enough to make it through the winter and not be a victim of scarcity. So this is much more of Capricorn type of mindset of planning and thinking and being very realistic and understanding the threat of scarcity and how to make sure that you are thinking ahead to plan for that sort of thing. And of course, Leo in the middle of summer, where the sun is the brightest, shining the most, and just radiating energy, selfhood, shining strongly. You can see how the different seasons really are very much coming through in the style, personality, characteristics of the zodiac signs. And from my perspective, to make a quick case for the tropical zodiac, I think that it makes sense to use the sun cycle rather than the constellations for the zodiac, because people are much more affected by the sun than they are the constellations. Even if you are not aware of astrology, you're certainly feeling the differences between the seasons and the length of days and the amount of light. This is something that affects all of us very much so. And while I do believe that the constellations probably have a real effect on us, and I think that there's probably a lot of information that you can get from the sidereal zodiac that is probably extremely helpful and meaningful for certain things, it just makes sense to me that the sun would have a stronger, larger, more felt, palpable impact than the constellations. Although in traditional astrology too, we still consider things called fixed stars, which are these seemingly unmoving, on the course of thousands of years, stars in the sky that have their own unique energy that they bring. So I absolutely believe that things like the fixed stars and constellations do have an impact, but I would guess that this has more of a societal, global, cultural level of impact, because it took about 4,000 years before we shifted one zodiac sign over within the sidereal zodiac, if we look at where the constellations actually are now. So the time scale is just much longer, so more of like a humanity level of change rather than a personal day-to-day level of change that you might notice. At least that's what makes sense to me. But of course, you can look into it and see how it feels for you to try out these different zodiacs. To get into the traditional rulership scheme, the sun rules Leo. Most planets rule 2 signs, but the sun and the moon only rule 1 sign. They are called the luminaries in astrology, the 2 biggest, brightest things that we see in the sky. And one is feminine, one is masculine. So Leo is our masculine luminary and Cancer is our feminine luminary. Whereas all of the other planets that have 2 signs that they rule have both a feminine and masculine sign that they rule. So Saturn has Capricorn feminine, Aquarius masculine. Venus has Libra masculine, Taurus feminine. Jupiter has Pisces feminine, Sagittarius masculine. So to understand what it means for the sun to rule Leo, I like to think about the ancient understanding of the signs and planets, because I find it to be very intuitive and helpful for understanding astrology and astrological thinking. So the way the ancients understood astrology was that the sky is like its own world. And in this sky world, there are 12 kingdoms, and these are the zodiac signs. And each of these 12 kingdoms has its own culture, its own way of being, its unique sort of personality. And within the sky world, we have the planets that are literally the etymologically meaning wandering stars, because of course originally people didn't know that these were planets. They just looked like stars that were moving around, so they called them wandering stars. And in the mythology of the sky world, these planets are like the wandering characters that traverse around the sky world, and sometimes they find themselves in places that are very supportive of their nature, and sometimes they find themselves in places that are quite difficult or antithetical to their nature. And each of these characters, these wandering stars, each planet is king or queen of one of these kingdoms in the sky world. And what this means is essentially the planet is like the more abstract kind of foundational fundamental energy that is underneath of the sign. So each of the signs is like a manifestation of its planetary rulership. So Leo is an embodiment of the sun. So Leo's characteristics are very much in alignment with what the sun wants to do. Leo loves to shine his light into the world. Leo is a very strong leader, very much heart-centered integrity, has no problem being seen, being on stage, being the center of attention. These are all things that Leo really enjoys and is strong with. And of course, there's two sides to every coin. There is a light and shadow side to each archetype. So the shadow side of the sun, the shadow side of Leo could be, if you take the self energy and self-expression a little bit too far, could even turn into sort of being egotistical. Even further than that, could be a little bit narcissistic, a little bit self-centered, a little selfish, maybe not quite as tuned into the needs of the collective, more self-focused. This would be the shadow side of Leo and the sun. Leo is the archetype of the king, and sometimes the king can be a little bit out of touch. Not always. There could be great kings. Could go either way. Each sign has its own propensity to be good and bad. Nothing is just one thing. To take a look at the zodiac wheel, I made this little graphic that I'll pull up here, which shows each of the signs in this outer wheel. We have the name of each of the signs. Inside of there, we have the symbol and the glyph. And then within that, we have the planetary ruler, the symbol of the planet, and then within there, the actual name in English of each planet. Whether or not the sign is cardinal, fixed, or mutable, earth, water, fire, air, and then inside of there, whether or not the sign is masculine or feminine. So there is a lot of super rich information laden in the symbol that I made, which you can download for free on my website if you would like. I'll link that below. Super valuable for your astrological learning. It will take a long time to really understand deeply and completely all of the symbolism that is in here. So, Leo, right here, ruled by the sun. And next to Cancer, ruled by the moon. And across from the two luminaries are Aquarius and Capricorn, both ruled by Saturn. So you'll notice that Saturn is always opposite a luminary. And that is because they have opposite nature. Everything is meaningful in here. And you'll notice that all of the planets are consistent in which planetary ruler is opposite which. So for instance, Jupiter is always opposite Mercury, and Mars is always opposite Venus within the two different signs that each of them rule. And that is because they have opposite nature. They want to do opposite things. So to focus in on the sun versus Saturn here in this opposition, you can think of Saturn as its most kind of foundational function, its most essential function, is to say no, to deny and decrease. Whereas the luminaries in their most essential function is sort of to say yes, to radiate this more kind of expansive, radiant energy. So in the Leo Aquarius axis, Leo is very much saying yes to the self and self-expression. And Aquarius is more on the side of self-denial, saying no to the self. The way this works out in the zodiacal energy that each of them are bringing, Aquarius is much more interested in what is best for the collective, what is needed generally. It doesn't really matter who I am or what I need. What matters is what's best for the world. Versus Leo is going to be more focused around self-expression and bringing that self-energy leading the way. And they're very comfortable with that. I also have a video on Saturn, so if you want to understand more about these Saturn-ruled signs, you can check out that video. So the moon on the other side is more saying yes to other people. Cancer and the moon is this mother energy that very much wants to nurture and caretake others. And Capricorn, in the feminine Saturn version, is saying no to other people more so. Capricorn is much more comfortable setting boundaries, saying no to things that are not for them, to people that are not serving a situation. Capricorn's quite comfortable with this, which is a superpower in some situations and sort of a difficulty to be around in others. There's always two sides to every coin. So for instance, where it is beautiful and wonderful and lovely and important to radiate self-energy, Leo, the sun, it can also be important to keep in mind what is best for the collective and sort of be a little bit more rational about things. This is more of the air side. Aquarius is an air sign and Leo is a fire sign. So they have this opposite elemental nature as well. Fire is always opposite to air. Passion versus reason. And on the Aquarius side of things, it is lovely and beautiful and important to be considering what is best for the collective and humanitarianism in general. And also, it's important to know who you are and what you uniquely are bringing into a situation. And the impact that you want to have on the world will be much more lasting and felt when you are actually bringing who you are into the situation, and you cannot really remove that. There is a self, and it is important to know yourself. Otherwise, you might just end up doing things that are rationally making sense, but actually have no connection to what you uniquely are meant to bring into the world. So this is the Aquarius-Leo axis, both important energies and both having light and shadow sides. To dive further into the planetary rulership scheme, we have the sun exalted in the sign of Aries over here. Boop, Aries, sun exalted here. Therefore, it has its fall in Libra, opposite to Aries. So the sun is very happy in Aries, ruled by Mars. Aries is also the head, the initiator, the leader, the warrior, oriented towards forward action and leadership. And this is something that the sun enjoys. That's essentially what it means for the sun to have its exaltation in Aries, that Aries is a place the sun really likes to be, that is supportive to the sun's nature. Whereas Libra, a little bit more difficult. This is the sun's fall. So in Libra, Libra is much more concerned with what is fair, weighing the pros and cons, what is just. Libra is ruled by Venus, which is much more about keeping the peace and harmony in relationships. And Libra is not so inclined to boldly say, this is what I think we need to do, here we go. Libra is not so inclined towards social bravery in this way. Libra will more likely sort of do what makes sense for the group to keep the cohesion, keep things moving smoothly and the flow of things, where the sun does not like to bend or bow to people in that way. This is a superpower of Libra, super important thing to be able to do, that they have this skill. But the sun is more like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, take me as I am. And that is why it's more happy with Aries energy, that is more kind of in alignment with that type of nature. The sun has its detriment in Aquarius, which is opposite to Leo, has an opposite nature to what the sun wants to do, the place of the sun's rulership, which makes sense, hopefully. Aquarius will be a harder place for the sun, the place where we want to express our ego, our self-energy, and Aquarius is just not really concerned with that at all, doesn't even necessarily believe in that or that there's any importance to that. So that's just a little bit more of a difficult place for the sun to be. But that doesn't mean that if you have an Aquarius sun, then you're just not going to have a strong ego or something. It just makes these people a little bit quirky. They're just not as interested in self-expression in the way that the sun might want to be, but that does not make them any worse people, or it's not like a worse sun sign to have. It's just a little bit opposite to what the sun wants to be doing. So these people tend to be a little quirky. As for the planetary joys, the sun rejoices in the ninth house, which in traditional astrology is called the place of God, opposite to the third house, which is the place of the goddess. So the ninth house in traditional astrology is associated with foreign travel, education, higher education, religious institutions, educational institutions, justice system type of things. And in ancient times, this religious and political leadership were not so separate. So the sun does have this kind of god king energy, this divine right to kingship. That's sort of the very ancient origin of the sun's energy. So that is part of why he rejoices in the ninth house, which is the place of God and also sort of institutional authority. The ninth house very much has to do with cultural institutions, whereas the third house is more kind of like community organizations and smaller scale things. The ninth house is more of these big structural religious institutions, educational institutions, justice systems, things like that. And like I mentioned at the beginning, the sun is also more inclined towards things like justice and judgment, which also has to do with the ninth house. So the sun is very happy here. And all of these things are considered conditions of bonification for the sun, whether or not the sun is in its domicile of Leo, its home, somewhere that's very supportive to it. This is a condition of bonification, or exaltation. If it was in Aries, this would be another condition of bonification, or in the ninth house, a place where it has its joy, versus the conditions of maltreatment. If the sun was in its fall or detriment, or in one of the dark houses, this would be conditions that were sort of less supportive to the sun, or if the sun was experiencing difficult aspects, which I'll get into shortly. But always hold these things loosely, you know? I don't think it's helpful to think of things as deterministic. The nature of astrology is archetypally predictive, not concretely predictive, so there's many different ways that any placement can play out, many different manifestations for any given placement. So to get into interpreting the sun in a birth chart, I think it's extremely interesting to look at the house that the sun is located in. This will be the area of life that you might shine the brightest in, where you might really feel able to express yourself and be seen or enjoy being seen, or maybe the way other people see you. So check out what house your sun is in. Another thing that's very important to look at for interpreting the sun is different aspects to the sun. In particular, for instance, if you have a planet conjunct the sun in the same place as the sun in your chart, then that will be an energy that is very much integrated to who you are, your ego, and how people see you in the world. You can also look at difficult aspects or harmonious aspects, the different relationships that the planets have with the sun. That is how ancient astrologers conceptualized the aspects, was as if they were relationships between the planets. So some aspects are challenging, square and opposition. Some are supportive, the sextile and the trine. So whether or not the characters are getting along, helping each other out, or if they're in a conflict and how bad is that conflict, who has the upper hand, these are all different things that we can look at through the aspects and different conditions of bonification and maltreatment. So aspects to the sun will probably be felt much more intensely than many of the other aspects. The thing about astrology is there's really no limit to the amount of nuance that you can bring to things. It can get incredibly subtle. But the things that are most overt and easily obviously felt for people generally tend to be aspects to the sun and moon and placements in the first house. These are things that are likely to show up, and if you look into them, be fairly obvious to you and probably resonate, unless your sun is in a dark house of the 12th house, the 8th house, the second house or the sixth house. If your sun is in one of these houses, then you might not identify with the sun's energy as much or feel the sun coming through you as much. So even aspects might not be felt as much, although you still probably will. It will just be especially obvious if your sun is not in one of these houses. I forgot to mention one of the most important and basic interpretive principles for the sun, which is that the people who were born during the daytime with the sun above the ascendant-descendant axis will probably identify more with the sun sign, and people born at night who have a night chart where the sun is below the ascendant-descendant axis will probably identify more with the moon sign. So if you've ever thought, oh, I don't really identify with my sun sign, I don't know if I'm really that, doesn't make sense, you might check out if you have a day chart or a night chart, and you also might check to see, again, if the sun is in one of those dark houses of the 8th, the 6th, the 12th, or the 2nd. And then lastly, to get into transits to the sun, new and full moons are something we can look at. Of course, the new moon is when the sun and moon can join together, and a full moon is when the sun and moon are opposite to each other. So these tend to represent a new moon, the beginning of a cycle, and a full moon, the culmination of that cycle. You could think of like a bell curve where the new moon is the beginning and then the full moon is the peak, and then after that comes into this dissemination period of spreading the seed, the gospel, whatever it was that we realized in the full moon in the peak period, then we distribute that, and that's the waning phase of the moon. So to get more into that, you can look at my moon video. I talk about moon cycles a lot more there. And also eclipses. I talk about that more in the moon video as well. But interestingly, so an eclipse is when you have a new or a full moon that's in alignment with the ecliptic or the nodal axis on top of the north and south nodes. So when we have an eclipse, something that is interesting, especially a solar eclipse, which is when the moon exactly blocks the light of the sun. Fascinatingly, in ancient times, this was associated with the fall of kings. They would notice that there was often a regime change, or that the king would even die during an eclipse, which makes perfect sense symbolically, given that the sun is like the king and the moon is eclipsing or blocking the light of the sun, sort of obscuring the sun in its peak period when it's meant to be seen brightly, and all of a sudden darkness falls across the land. It makes sense that that's sort of associated with the fall of kings. So we don't necessarily have kings anymore, but you might consider different people in different industries sort of king-like in the amount of influence they have on the world and culture. So could be interesting to look out for. Eclipses also just generally symbolize major beginnings and endings. So in your own life, that could be related to the house that the eclipse is happening in. So an eclipse in the 7th house, for instance, can indicate a major beginning or ending in the realm of relationships. The 7th house has to do with marriage, partnership, relationships, things like that. So that's something you can look out for. But all of that I'll leave more in my moon video if you want to check it out, a deeper dive there. So funnily enough, the only transit that people generally know about in the collective, although they don't recognize it as a transit, is the solar return. This is your birthday. We all celebrate birthdays. Maybe not everybody, but generally everyone knows what a birthday is, when the sun returns to the same point in the sky that it was when you were born. Of course, that's not the way we think about it. We just think about the day that you were born, but that was when the sun was in the same place in the sky as it is on your birthday in the future. And so in astrology, a lot of times people will get solar return charts, so you can sort of look at the chart of the birthday to get a sense of what the year ahead is like. And there are many different astrological timing techniques that have to do with your age. So of course the sun returning is what changes your age year to year. So this is very significant astrologically for many different more advanced timing techniques that I won't really get into here, but know that the solar return is important and your age at birthday is important. And I think that's about it for the sun. So feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions. I'll make sure to respond to all of the questions in the comments. You can let me know if anything resonated or didn't resonate in this video. Also be sure to subscribe if you would like to be notified when future videos come out for the different planets and zodiac signs and everything else, or if you just like what I'm doing here and want to support my work, you can also subscribe to support me. That really helps. Also, a like or a share really helps. If there's someone that you know that might be interested in this sort of thing, share it along. And know that I offer astrology consultations. I do 60-minute consultations where we get into the birth chart as a symbol of who you are, strength, weaknesses, purpose, character. And I do 90-minute consultations where we get into timing, the future, the past, cycles you're in, career peaks, what you can expect in the year coming up, things like that. Fascinating stuff. Happy to help you in any way that I can. I will link my website below to book a reading with me, or you can send me a message if you have any questions or just want to hear more about what I do, or have even a little call to see if I might be the right astrologer for you. Feel free to get in touch. I'm available. I'm also a jeweler and I made these earrings. I have earrings for sale on my website, so I'll put that in the link below as well if you're interested. And feel free to follow me on Instagram at Promethea Astrology. I offer lots of in-person workshops and things if you're in Philadelphia, and maybe I'll offer them online soon too. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for being here with me. Wishing you peace and health.